Welcome into the Dog Check podcast. We are back as part of the Believe Network of podcasts, also airing on Bally Sports Great Lakes. I'm Spencer German, excited to be back with you guys. July is officially here, which means training camp is almost here, which means football is almost here, which is obviously, hey, what's more exciting than that? It's just around the corner, and I'm certainly excited to be talking about with you the rest of the summer and into the season. We'll have you covered here on the Dog Check podcast. Less exciting, I did want to sort of start with this. There was some unfortunate news that the Browns shared this week as they have unfortunately announced the passing of their beloved mascot, SJ, the Bulldog that fans have obviously come to know and love over the last several years. Truly sad from a fan perspective. And listen, we're the Dog Check podcast. The word dog is in our name. We are branded for the Browns fan base. So I thought it was worth mentioning. We obviously thinking about that. But more exciting on a lighter note, I'm excited to be joined by Antwan Staley this week, who covers the NFL and the New York Jets for the Daily News. Antwan, I can't thank you enough for giving us some time this week. I actually want to start because as somebody who covers the Jets full time, I can't imagine that Jets fans took it very well watching Joe Flacco do what he did for the Browns last year when he was there previously and didn't really do much for the Jets.
Yeah, I think from a Jets fan's perspective, like you saw what Flacco was like. He got a few starts for the Jets in 2022, and then it was some up and down. I think one of his best games, coincidentally enough, was against Cleveland, week 2, where
we remember that game because
yeah,
that was the infamous. They were up like 2 scores, and
yes, 13
then like
points.
the Jets got the onside kick, and that was a debacle. We were very much upset with that one.
Yeah, so I think in that sense, like, yeah, you saw that. You saw a lot of good, saw some bad too as well. And then he goes to Cleveland, and then all of a sudden, just turns it on and helps them reach the playoffs. And it's not nothing. The Browns also had injuries, especially on the offensive line, and they were able to overcome that. And Flacco, he's not the most mobile guy in the world, but he found a way to make it work. And I definitely think, it was definitely exciting to see him get to the playoffs. But yeah, I think a lot of Jet fans, there's definitely a lot of bittersweet considering the fact that there was a lot of expectations on the Jets like they are this year. And they had to watch Zach Wilson basically a majority of the season, was pretty much inefficient the entire year.
Yeah, we certainly enjoyed that wild ride at the expense of you guys a little bit with that playoff clinching win on Thursday night late in the season. But it was obviously a fun story for us and some memories made. But in the meantime, we go from a former Browns quarterback to the current Browns quarterback, and we know so much of this season is about Deshaun Watson and how well he's going to be able to play and get back to form after the shoulder surgery, after the year off that he had, after the suspension year that he had, and he's still trying to kind of find that old version of himself. I guess I'm just going to ask you off the top because pretty much everybody who comes on the show, I make them plant their flag. Are you on the side of Deshaun is going to bounce back and could be a top 10 quarterback again? Or are you on the side of you think that guy's long gone and the Browns fans should probably just expect that he's going to be more of a middle tier quarterback?
I'm in the middle, but if I had to pick, I probably would be somewhere towards the fact that I don't think he might be that MVP type of guy. And you may, to be honest with you, I think the Browns are talented enough to be able to overcome that. They're paying him obviously like a, top tier quarterback. So you expect him to be what he was in Houston. But, it's been a long time since we've seen that guy. I mean, quite frankly, whether it be, you talk about the suspension and, the time off and things of that nature too. But the proof is put in pudding. We've seen the last couple of years. We've seen a guy that hasn't been consistent when he has played. It has been healthy and, struggle with accuracy and just not, that dominant player that I think the Browns expected him to be when they signed him to that crazy contract when he was added. So yeah, I think they have the skill set, they have the skill position players where obviously Chubb and I think like their offensive line, and then obviously you got a game record and Myles Garrett on the other side on the defensive side of the ball. So I still think they're a playoff team, no matter if he's the MVP or not. But if he can reach that level, then we're talking a team that could potentially contend for, not only just in the playoffs, but for the Super Bowl potentially there. Because I think they're that good, especially that they just play in a monsters road division where all 4 of those teams can make the playoffs.
Yeah, we'll certainly talk about that a little bit later on. I do want to use there was a clip that we have from the Sims Complete podcast. Matt Sims and his dad. Matt's been on the show before, and he always brings some great insight to the table. I thought they had some interesting commentary about Deshaun. I'll play this clip here, and I have a question on the other side just about the pressure that is on him this year.
I got to see Deshaun Watson stay in the game, and play more than one game that's good, and the other ones that come on, we talked about this last year. What was he doing when he was healthy?
Right.
He was playing out of control. And we talked about earlier. I mean, it was really unbelievable. It was like he was out there and he was mad at the world. He was going to try to beat everybody up on the defensive side, which when you try to do that as a quarterback, you lose. That's, you just can't win that kind of battle. And he's all the money, the investment, it's time to play, protect yourself, manage the game better. It's not all about we got to make it happen right this second. And I thought his downfield throwing overall, I just didn't think it was not sharp. And they had people wide open for touchdowns, especially early in the year. I understand, but that he hadn't played a lot of football up to that. But even then, when you're throwing the ball down the field, you don't even have to be that accurate. Just get it somewhere in the area. And he didn't do that.
I think what's pretty poignant about that clip is, and it's something that I actually talked about with Matt when he was on the show at one point, was just this idea that I do think there was a mental side of this to Deshaun where he was trying to get it all back at once, like trying to do too much almost and thinking about things. And to Phil's point, I do think he has to kind of just dial it back and keep it simple this year and go out there and play football. I mean, he talked about the incomplete passes. I saw this stat from Warren Sharp the other day. Highest rate of incompletions due to inaccurate passes, and Deshaun led the league in that category with 43.9% of his passes were because he was throwing bad passes for his incompletions. Like, I just think there's this hurdle there for him that he's trying to get past, and so that leads to my question for you, Antwan. Is there a player as you look around the league, and I actually think you bring a good lens to this, being you're covering the Jets, you got the Aaron Rodgers situation there. Is there a player in the NFL this season coming into 2024 that has more to prove than Deshaun Watson in your perspective?
Other than it might be Aaron, but I think they're kind of on the same level, but for different reasons. I think Deshaun is under a microscope for, obviously the off the field things. He's very polarizing for that. And then the fact that he's getting paid a ton of money, which was just unprecedented, as I kind of brought up before. But as like Phil said, he hasn't played a lot of football. I mean, he's played 12 games in the last 2 years. I mean, that's less than a season worth of games. So you had to expect there was going to be some rustiness, especially considering, I mean, he missed all of 21, came back, late in the season in 22. So, but yeah, I mean, at the same time, again, you're a professional, you're getting paid a lot of money. You came in last year. I mean, the Browns were playing really well, and despite the fact that he was not necessarily, up to par with his play, but this is it. I think this is a major, major year for him. And then you talk about another player. I think Aaron is under that same microscope, only for a different reason, because one, he's polarizing in himself, obviously off the field things, not in the same manner as Deshaun, but a lot of people either tend to love Aaron Rodgers or they hate him. That's basically kind of basically where most people stand. And him coming off a major injury, like an Achilles injury, 4 plays into his Jets career debut. And then it's a lot of pressure on the Jets because I think they have to make the playoffs because I mean, Robert Saleh, he's been there for 3 years, has a losing record. Joe Douglas, their general manager, has been there since 2019, also has a losing record. The Jets themselves have not made the playoffs since 2010, which is the longest playoff drought in the 4 major professional sports. So both of those guys are under a big microscope, and they have to win. I think Deshaun has to play well, obviously, especially considering you had Joe Flacco come in there off the street and help this team reach the playoffs. So that is the bare minimum. As a Browns fan, as an observer, you probably okay, he at least has to get them to the playoffs because otherwise, why is he here? And it's just a waste of money considering the fact that he is not shown to be worthy of that at the moment too. But both of those guys are under a big microscope in 2024 for different reasons.
I love that we get to have this conversation from those two lenses, the Brown side, the Jet side, because when you think about guys that are under the most pressure, I think both of them are near the top of the list, if not at the top of the list. So that was good. And we'll get back to the Jets here in a little bit. I do want to focus in on another situation going on here in Cleveland revolving around Amari Cooper and his ongoing contract situation. I'm sure, as you know, he skipped mandatory minicamp, sort of a statement by him. And it was surprising from our perspective because what do we know about Amari Cooper? He's generally been a consummate pro. Like, he doesn't usually do stuff this way, but clearly he was saying, hey, I want to get paid. What is your, I guess, advice on, or how do you feel about teams paying wide receivers once they hit that 30-year mark? Because I actually think recently we've seen there's some receivers that are getting paid into their early 30s, and it's become more prominent. But we know 30 is one of those red flag numbers when a player gets there for teams. Should the Browns be willing to pay Amari Cooper, you think?
I think so. I mean, I think he's consistent. I think he's a guy that's I don't know if I would give him like a super long-term deal, but I think he deserves to get paid. I think a 3-year deal and then, put in a lot of guaranteed money there. I think he's deserved that because I think he's been, a reliable target for whoever's been the quarterback. And then I think that's part of the issue too, where you have a revolving door of quarterbacks for various reasons. Obviously, you wanted Watson, to stay healthy last year, but you had Flacco, you had DTR the year before that, Jacoby Brissett too. And, Amari Cooper just continues to produce numbers and is being a reliable target. So if I'm in his perspective, then I go and I'm his representation. I go in there and say, it doesn't matter who the quarterback has been. Amari has produced at a high level, the last few years. And I think that's a valid point too. And I think you want to keep him happy, especially considering, what we talked about with Deshaun and all the pressure that he's going to face too. You want to have that reliable target, and that's comfortable and happy in Amari Cooper. So yeah, I definitely think, you could pay him, give him a 2 or 3 year deal and, get loaded with some guarantees there. If you want to add a void year or option or whatever your case may be, you're able to do that. But yeah, I think it's important to keep somebody like that happy, especially considering, it's a lot of, again, big microscope over the offense this year.
Darius Slay, corner for the Eagles, obviously, he was on the Green Light podcast this week, or I guess over the weekend or late last week, whatever it was. And he made some comments about Amari Cooper being the most underrated wide receiver in football. Do you agree with that? Do you think he is an underrated wide receiver that maybe doesn't get the credit or respect around the league for whatever reason?
Yes, absolutely, because he's quiet. He's a quiet guy. You don't really hear much about him. He doesn't really say a whole lot. And this even go back to like when he was with the Raiders. Like he's just a very smooth type of guy. He kind of, not production-wise, but kind of personality-wise, kind of remind me of Marvin Harrison when he played, where really didn't hear a lot of Marvin Harrison. You heard from Peyton and, Edgerrin James and other people on the team. But, Marvin was just a very smooth, just quiet type of individual. I think Amari kind of fits in that same mold, whereas, it's I think most people think receivers are divas and very they very vocal and like, just give me the ball. And I'm sure Amari is doing that, but he's just doing it in a different type of way than most receivers are in this day and age.
I think you're right. And listen, you talk about diva wide receivers, like we had Odell Beckham Jr. here in Cleveland, and fans knew firsthand like what it was like to have a guy on that side of it versus a guy like Amari Cooper. The thing we love about Amari Cooper here in Cleveland is like we have this slogan we call like Gets Cleveland, and it's guys like Nick Chubb, it's guys like Amari Cooper, it's guys who just show up like lunch pail in hand, ready to get to work. That's like the Cleveland mentality, obviously. So we love guys like that here. So I as much as he's underrated, it's funny because I think he's underrated from like a maybe national perspective.
Correct.
But I think in Cleveland, we understand how important and valuable he is.
Oh yeah, and if you watch ball, and if you really look at film, and you know how good he is. Like everybody, like I think analysts, writers report. Most people know how good Amari Cooper is. That's why I think he is underrated from this perspective when we talk about top wide receivers in this league, and when you talk about a top 10, top 20 list. I don't know how many people are putting him in there, but he deserves to get, be up there, be mentioned, along with the best wide receivers in the game.
Antwan Staley joining us on the Dog Check this week, having some great conversations with him. And we certainly appreciate his time and you guys for tuning in as well, whether you're listening via the Believe Network or at Bally Sports Great Lakes. I got a few more questions, a few more minutes with you, Antwan. I want to make the most of them. So from a national perspective, and maybe even from a New York perspective, as you look at the AFC North, you mentioned earlier, it's a gauntlet of a division, some of the toughest schedules in football this year just because of how good those teams were last year, but then also the teams that they have to play when you get the cross-conference match or cross-division and cross-conference matchups. Which team do you think in the AFC North? And all 4 of these teams finished above 500 last year. We know 3 made the playoffs. Which team do you think has a chance to take a leap forward and improve upon last year? And which team do you think is maybe most poised to take a step back?
Well, you talk about the Cincinnati Bengals, and obviously Joe Burrow's health is going to
Yeah.
factor in a
Easy
lot.
answer, I think, for that one,
Yeah,
for sure.
I think Cincinnati's the team that everybody's looking towards. I mean, you had Baltimore that had an incredible year. Lamar was the MVP. You had Derrick Henry. I think they're still going to be in the midst there. But getting a healthy Joe Burrow, I mean, it's just a complete game changer for not only Cincinnati but the entire division. If he can stay healthy and play well, because he, even before then, he had some questionable games. In particular, week 1 against the Browns last year, where he ended up throwing I believe 4 interceptions if I'm not mistaken. If he plays well, then I think Cincinnati has a chance to win the AFC. If he doesn't, or if he doesn't stay healthy, then we're talking about them. I was surprised they finished over 500, which I think that was, this shows a testament of the culture and the team that they have. But that would be the team that I'd be looking forward to. Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh's interesting for me. The quarterback battles that everybody's talking about with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. And, I think the one common denominator with Pittsburgh is always Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin just, no matter what the Steelers, like you can look at their roster sometimes and just say, how did this team finish over 500?
Antwan, I'll tell you, man, we have been trying to predict the downfall of the Steelers here in Cleveland for years. We've been waiting for it anxiously, just giddy with excitement to finally declare them dead. And Mike Tomlin just finds a way to keep them afloat. It's the most annoying thing ever.
Exactly. If you talk about a team that I think might take a little bit of a step back, it might be Baltimore to an extent, because I don't know if they'll be as good as what they were, because I think the division has gotten so much better. Yeah. But they're going to be there. They're going to be in the midst. It wouldn't surprise me if they were to win the division. It actually wouldn't surprise me if they were to miss the playoffs. I think it's just that's kind of how they are. That's kind of how I feel about the Ravens there. I really do like the Browns, but obviously, as we touched on, it's going to be a lot of it's on Deshaun Watson. Like, if he can get back to form again, he doesn't have to be 2020 Deshaun Watson with the Texans, but if he can help lessen the mistakes that he has on the field and find receivers and become an accurate passer once again, then the Browns got a shot, especially considering how good their defense is. I think their defense is arguably the best in football. A lot of people talk about the Jets and some other teams, Kansas City, but I think Cleveland's defense is really their calling card. It's really going to, I think that separates them from other teams in the division.
Well, back in the division that you know best, being on the Jets beat, where do you feel the Jets sort of fit into the hierarchy of the AFC? Are they a legitimate Super Bowl contender? Because we know their roster is pretty loaded as well. And a lot of, similar to Deshaun, I think a lot of it is going to fall on the shoulders of Aaron Rodgers this year.
I'm not there on Super Bowl contender. They still have to prove it to me. Now, playoffs, I think they are a playoff contender, because I think they've improved the offensive line. They have an incredible defense there, led by Quentin Williams, Sauce Gardner. I think those are 2 guys that everybody mentions. There's C.J. Mosley. I think he's still, it stood the test of time, still chugging along, being a solid linebacker. Quincy Williams also had a tremendous year for the Jets too. But I think they are a wild card team. They could win the division potentially. I still think Buffalo's the best team in the AFC East. And then you look at Miami and the Jets. I think they're going to be battling out for the wild card spot. But the AFC it is going to be you talk about gauntlet just in the AFC North. Like, the AFC in general is just going to be a dogfight. No pun intended.
Yeah.
But because, you got the Dolphins, the Jets, you got every team in the AFC North, basically. And now we hadn't even talked about the South, where you got Jacksonville and you got, the Texans, who I think are teams that, are going to contend there. And the Colts, the Colts almost made the playoffs last year. And then we'll see what they are with Anthony Richardson coming back and no Gardner Minshew. And then you got the AFC West. Obviously, the Chiefs are going to be there. It'll be interesting to see what the Chargers become with Jim Harbaugh there and his brand of football there. I think he's going to make them really tough, and I think that's exactly what the Chargers need. And then that could just take some pressure off of Justin Herbert. But you can make the case it could be 11 or 12 teams vying for 7 playoff spots, and it's going to be some good, solid teams that are going to get left out. That's just the reality of it. But it's just that good of a conference right now.
As a follow-up to that, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, but is there a sleeper team that we're not talking about enough that actually that has a legitimate chance to make the playoffs, maybe make a deep run in the playoffs, or maybe somehow sneak their way into the Super Bowl just based off some of the moves that they made? I think a lot of people are really high on the Texans as the team that's emerging next because of CJ Stroud. But is there somebody else from that division? Is there somebody else in maybe the East? Is there a team that you think you're maybe looking at and saying, yeah, we're not talking enough about that team potentially being a threat?
I like Jacksonville. I think a lot of people have just kind of, thrown Jacksonville to the side because the Texans are the new flavor of the month, with CJ
Yeah.
Stroud there. And, they had a tremendous year. I think last year, people were feeling that way about Jacksonville. And then, Trevor Lawrence had some injuries, banged up. They kind of underachieved from a record perspective there. They did finish over 500, but, 9-8, especially, they didn't keep up that same momentum that they did in 2022, where they pushed the Chiefs in the AFC divisional round, at least a little bit there. So I think Jacksonville's a team. I'm not saying they're going to get to the Super Bowl, but I think they're a team that not only could still win that division, but, they could win a playoff game and make things interesting too. I just don't think we're talking enough about them. And I think, getting the healthy Trevor Lawrence back, and also, Doug Peterson, into his third year, we know how good of a coach he is, whether it be with the Eagles or, helping out Jacksonville. I think they're a team to watch out for. I think people should definitely, and I like the moves that they've made throughout the offseason too as well.
I'm curious your thoughts, Antwan, as we hear so much about the expansion of the schedule and all these different things. And, it's fun because we like to prognosticate about, certain teams being in the mix, and it always falls back on, hey, if this guy stays healthy or that guy stays healthy, this team can be something. Do you worry at all that the NFL is playing with fire a little bit when it comes to trying to expand the schedule out? I understand why they're doing it. Like, first of all, money's the bottom line. We know that. Right. But also trying to get the Super Bowl lined up with President's Day weekend's always been on their radar. They want to do that to give people Mondays off, whatever that might be. So, like, is there a tipping point where the NFL, like, almost crosses the line on trying to invade people's lives too much, where it's like, hey, we're putting games on Christmas now every year, and we're trying to go to 18 games? Could it get to that point, or do you think the NFL is such a mammoth of a machine that it's never going to matter? They can do whatever they want.
I think they kind of is back to your latter point. I think they feel like they can just do whatever they want to, because I think they feel like it's like a 24-hour news cycle now, and they feel like they want to invade on every single territory, whether it be the off season or whether it be in the season. And that's kind of why you see Christmas games going to be on the Wednesday, and that's why we can put a game on Amazon or Netflix, and we know people are going to watch. They might complain about it, but they're still going to watch. And I think that's kind of what they're doing too. So no matter, because people love football so much, and no matter, the game, whether you have news going on in February, March, July, whatever the case may be, they always want to feel like they're in the news cycle. Even now, like, you have shows like NFL Live and things of that nature too, where they're talking about Tua Tagovailoa's contract. And then that's a big thing, even though, we're still weeks away from training camp. I just think they want to involve themselves in every single aspect of, not just people's lives, but, what's going on sports wise there. Cause right now it's like, you have the Olympics coming up, you got baseball, kind of the dog days of summer, why not just throw out some NFL news there every now and then? I think that's what they're trying to do. Just trying to keep the news cycle going as long as they can.
That's fair. I part of it for me, I think, is just it revolves around the injury part of this. Like we get the numbers every year about, I think it was like upwards of like almost 70 different quarterbacks started a game last year in the NFL. And when you're teetering at that level of turnover at that position, we know how important that position is. You just risk, I think, like watering down the product, and the more games you add, the more you're risking injuries. So I find that there's this interesting dynamic, I think, that exists there with wanting to expand out the schedule, eat up more people's time, get more eyes on your sport, get that money, while also understanding, like, you don't want to ruin the product to a point where people are like, well, I don't have to watch this game. Because there was a point, like, Thursday night games used to be so bad that I think people sometimes tune those out, and they were like, I'll just catch it on Sunday and Monday. So I think they do it to be careful somewhat, but I think your point is definitely valid.
I agree, because, I just think that 16 games was perfect. I thought, 16 schedule, and I think what makes the NFL, why people love it so much, it doesn't come on every day. It comes on, well, now, like, you got Thursday games, Sunday, and, Monday for the most part, except for like special towards the end of the season. So, I think that's what differentiates the NFL from every other sport, whereas baseball is every day, or NBA is like 2 or 3 days a week. Same thing with the NHL and other sports. But, everybody, and then it's the time in between. It's that idle time where, it's the build up. towards the next game, and people are talking trash, and that's where social media and stuff comes on and comes about, and then people get excited, and then either you're going to be on a super high or you're going to be on a really down low for next week, and it's the same thing for 17 weeks or so. So I think that's what makes the NFL so great.
Well, I tell you what, this end of this conversation got me even more jazzed for the season to get here. It's just around the corner. We're in July. Training camps are going to be starting up soon enough, and we're certainly excited to be there. Antwan Staley, he covers the Jets and the NFL at large for the Daily News. Antwan, just real quick, where can people find you?
Antwan Staley, all social media platforms, including X, Twitter. Also find my work at the New York Daily News too at nydailynews.com.
Can't thank you enough for the time. We also appreciate you guys tuning in. That's going to do it for the latest episode of the Dog Check Podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to like, follow, subscribe to the show, and you can also catch it weekly on Bally Sports Great Lakes as well. Thanks again, Antwan. Thanks again to all our watchers and listeners out there. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, go Browns.